Thank you for that welcome, and thank you for inviting me. My goal here for this talk is really to teach people about the ways that sleep impacts health, the way sleep impacts how we work, how we go about our lives, and then to offer some ideas to people about how to kind of concretely think about how to improve one's sleep. Before I go any further, I have no disclosures or conflicts of interest related to this talk. The first thing I want to get across is just how important sleep is for almost every organ system we know about. And when we first started studying sleep, which started here at Stanford, one of the first places where sleep was really studied about 50 years ago, it was a field that was really ignored, or people thought that sleep wasn't that important. But the more people started to look at sleep, the more we realized the many different ways that sleep impacts our health. And in fact, the way we sleep and how we sleep can have an effect on nearly every organ system we know about. Sleep is important for brain health, including focus, concentration, attention, and judgment. Sleep can affect our mood, and sleep can influence memory and how we age. And sleep disorders have been linked now to things like dementia. Sleep can affect our metabolic health, including our ability to follow a proper diet, our ability to maintain a healthy weight. Sleep can affect our immune system, which is important, obviously, for maintaining health and fighting disease. Sleep can affect how our endocrine system works, including many of our endocrine hormones like thyroid function, and insulin function. And sleep can impact cardiovascular health. Poor sleep and sleep disorders are associated very strongly with increased risk of coronary artery disease, heart attack, arrhythmia, and stroke. And that's why when people first started studying sleep, and people would ask, well, why are you studying this? The answer of one of really the founders of sleep is that, well, we do this for nearly a third of our lives, and if sleep doesn't serve some vital function, well, it's the biggest mistake that evolution's ever made. And in fact, the more we look at sleep, now what we see is that we can link sleep not just to health problems, but to actual mortality. And what we find is that if people who don't sleep in a normal range have higher risk of death, so people who sleep less than 7 hours, and particularly less than 6 hours, we find that the mortality rates are higher. And interestingly enough, those mortality rates also go up when people start sleeping more than 9 hours. In addition to just mortality, sleepiness has a big toll on our work lives. And in fact, sleep-related fatigue can cost U.S. businesses upwards of $150 billion a year. And this is due to a variety of factors, including absenteeism, lost productivity, and workplace accidents. So when compared to healthy individuals, those with sleep loss or sleep disorders, or both, are often less productive, have an increase in the utilization of healthcare, and an increase in likelihood of accidents. And of course, it doesn't take a very strong imagination to think about, well, how those accidents can impact you. And one way is, here in the medical field, we tend to work long hours, and we tend to push people to work extreme lengths of time. And what we find is that, for example, surgeons who are on call after they've been on call and awake for 23, 24 hours, they tend to make more surgical errors. Another important field where people look at the impact of sleep and sleep disorders and how that impacts not only their health and their lives, but the lives of those around them, is transportation. And this is one of the, in my view, the scariest slides, probably the scariest slide I have up here, which is that if you look at how accidents occur for long-haul truckers, what you see is that there's a significant temporal distribution where truckers tend to get into more accidents in the early morning hours. And why is that? It's because they've been up all night driving and haven't recognized their own fatigue, or in some instances maybe have recognized their fatigue but haven't taken the correct action, which is to sleep. And in fact, the National Transportation Safety Board has found that in these accidents, that fatigue is actually the #1 cause. And it's the same number of accidents as those caused by drugs and alcohol combined. Not only that, but the truckers who were involved in accidents that have been attributed to fatigue have found to have the highest caffeine levels of any driver tested. So what does that mean? It means they're working for long periods of time. They're tired, maybe even recognizing they're tired, but instead of sleeping or recovering, trying to compensate for that sleepiness with caffeine. And what we find is that caffeine, well, it's good in certain instances, but it cannot overcome extreme sleepiness. It cannot overcome the deleterious effects of that. Now, all of this is to show that we know, and as we've studied sleep, we know more and more about the importance of sleep. And yet when we actually study how people sleep, we see that the average sleep duration in adults keeps decreasing. 1959 was when the first survey of sleep hours in adults went out, and what that survey found was that in normal, healthy adults, the average sleep duration was found to be between 8 to 8.5 hours. By 1969, when another poll went out, that sleep duration had already decreased down to between 7 hours and 16 minutes and 7 hours and 41 minutes. By 2009, the average American slept only 7 hours, and 1 in 3 Americans slept 6 hours or less per night on weekdays. On weekends, at least, the average amount of sleep went up a little bit, but only to 7 hours and 36 minutes. Remember, one of those slides I showed you was that as sleep drops below 7 hours, we have this correlation to increase in mortality. Now, what we find is now we are more quantified than ever, and all sorts of people are tracking their sleep, myself included. So what does all this data tell us? What we see now is that Fitbit pushes this data, and you can access this on their website, and they show that now the average Fitbit user is sleeping just 6 hours and 38 minutes. So even in the past decade, sleep has decreased further. And across all age groups, we find that there is this pervasiveness of insufficient sleep and sleep deprivation. Gen Z is doing the best. The youth is the future, absolutely. They're closest to 7 hours. Baby boomers, 6.5 hours. Right? So we are not meeting our general sleep needs, and it is affecting our health, and it is affecting the way we work and the way we perform at our jobs. So the question is, why? Right? Why aren't we sleeping enough? Well, one of the answers is, well, people have sleep disorders. Sleep disorders are very common, and we'll get into that a little bit later. People certainly have other health problems, right? And as we get older, we tend to have more of them. Things like just general pain, right, can interfere with our sleep and can really impact our ability to sleep. Environmental factors are becoming more pervasive, right? As we increase technology, well, we can measure things, but that technology intrudes into our bedroom. So we have more distractions around the evening time that can intrude into our sleep. Work has become, for almost everybody, 24 hours, especially so right now. And what we find is that as we work or participate in other activities, sleep is often the thing that we sacrifice. Other environmental factors, things like noise, light, kids, partners, pets, stress, diet, caffeine, alcohol, all of these things can impact how we sleep. Our work conditions, as I said, work for almost everybody now with email and with our phones is basically a 24-hour job, right? You can be accessed at any point by anybody. People are overworked. Medical interns, residents, right, are commonly overworked, but now people in all sorts of fields. And then more and more what we find is that as all these other distractions come into our life, that sleep gets deprioritized relative to other things. It's easy to push sleep back, right? If your boss expects you to be working at night and then expects you to be up early in the morning, or you've got to take your kids to school, it's easy to say, well, I'll just go to bed an hour later because, my boss needs me and my kids need me and everyone else needs me, right? So part of this talk is learning how to push against that and how to reprioritize sleep. And we're going to get into that a little bit later. Part of the reason I think sleep is maybe deprioritized is we have a pretty good understanding, I think everybody has a pretty good understanding of the effects of being sleep deprived when it's in a very dramatic way. So if you stay up for 24 straight hours, so you totally sleep deprive yourself, you really feel that, right? You feel tired and you feel different and you truly don't feel yourself. And in fact, we know if we test people's reaction time, and if we look at people and see how fast they can react to different cues when they've been up 24 hours, their reaction time is as slow as if they were legally drunk. So as if they had a blood alcohol concentration of 0.08. And oftentimes we can feel that way. Certainly when I went through my medical training, I many times was up for 24 hours and I did not feel like myself. But what we tend to not understand, and it's part of our brain's own compensatory mechanism, is we tend not to be able to recognize and become aware of the more pervasive problem, which is not staying up for 24 hours, but losing a little bit of sleep here and there, what we call chronic sleep deprivation. But what we find is that when people are sleep deprived, chronically, losing a little bit of sleep every day, that the effect on their health and on their reaction time and their performance is just as severe. So in this slide, what you see is that people who are sleep deprived for just 7 or 5 hours, and especially for 3 hours over the period of just 1 week, that their reaction time and their performance deteriorates over the course of that week. And not just that, but that if those people are all allowed to then recover and allowed to sleep for 9 hours, so let's say you have a busy week of work and you're only getting 5 hours of sleep, and then you let yourself sleep in on the weekends. What we find is that reaction time does not recover in those few days that you're trying to make up that sleep. So your reaction time remains low, right? So this is the problem of chronic sleep deprivation. And the problem with that is that then becomes your new normal, right? So you are not aware of the difference between where you are and where you could be. But we can study this. And the reason we can study this is because sleep patterns change. And so here is one good example of that. I'll demonstrate with an unmarked graph. So here are just average number of hospital admissions per 100,000 people. So hospital admissions per capita. And what you see is the 7 days before something happens and then the 7 days after. And then what you can see is that on day 1 after this event, that hospital admissions go down, and hospital admissions actually stay down for the next 5 days. So what is this event? Well, it's something we all experience because we have to. It is the end of daylight savings time. So this is what happens in the fall when we all get to sleep in an extra hour, is that we see over the next week hospital admissions go down. Right, so just this 1 hour of sleep, when spread across the entire population, results in a decrease in hospital admissions. Now, why does it come back up? It's because that normalizes, right? Everyone goes back to their normal routine and everyone becomes sleep deprived again. It's not just hospital admissions. We also know that things like fatal car accidents change. Fatal car accidents go down in the fall during daylight savings time, and fatal car accidents increase in the spring when daylight savings time resumes, right? Spring forward, we lose an hour of sleep. We intentionally sleep deprive our entire country's population. This has also been shown to be not just fatal traffic accidents, but the effects of daylight savings time in spring has shown to have an increase in workplace injuries and an increase in stroke and heart attack visits to the emergency room. And all of this, as I said, is just from a 1 hour time change. So sleeping in the fall, gaining that extra hour is helpful. What we're going to talk about later on is how to make every day the end of daylight savings time and how to regain that extra hour. So strategies we can use. Another avenue that seems particularly relevant right now for our health, as I'm giving this talk to a room filled with nobody around, is the effect of sleep on our body's immune system. And in fact, what we see is that your chances of catching a cold increase when you're sleep deprived. And it's not just catching a cold, our body's ability to respond to a vaccine. So if you give somebody, for example, a flu vaccine, they create a more robust immune response if they have slept well leading up to that vaccination, right? So our body's immune system responds to our amount of sleep. So how do we go about sleeping more? Well, here's where I'm going to talk about a particular population that I work with a lot, which is elite athletes, right? And the athlete world and the athlete culture has, for a long time, had a negative relationship with sleep. And the reason for that is that when you are trying to attain a goal, the possibility of being present and working on it, when you are trying to make the Olympics, when you're trying to win a gold medal, when you're trying to win a championship, the thought is, I always need to be practicing, right? I always need to be on, because if I'm not practicing, I'm not getting better. And you can see it just if you search through Twitter for various posts about this, where you have examples of this include these posts from 6 a.m. People saying, when you sleep, we train, right? We're up early, we're training, we're working hard. But what our argument is in the sleep world is that if you sleep deprive yourself, your training will be less successful and your performance will be worse, right? And this has gone against years and years of the way athletics has run, and a lot of the kind of pervading thoughts about athletics and the idea of practice makes perfect. And what we in the sleep world say is, no, take a few hours, take more time off and rest, because it will help you. The thing is, when you show athletes this and you test this in athletes, they will listen, they will do it, right? And the reason is because they have true physical performance gains. And it's harder to find those in your day-to-day life, right? So me giving this talk, whether I do it on 5 hours of sleep or 8 hours of sleep, it's probably pretty similar, right? It's probably hard to tell. No one tells from this talk how I slept last night. But if you are an Olympic sprinter, how much sleep you get might be the difference between being first and being last, because you're talking about milliseconds. So what happens when you tell athletes to sleep more? Well, here's a study where athletes were advised to get up to 10 hours of sleep per night. This was done with the Stanford men's basketball team. And over the course of 7 weeks, these athletes were allowed to sleep up to 10 hours every single night. And what you found is, one, they were able to successfully increase their sleep by over an hour every night. So they were able to extend their sleep upwards, right? Which showed that they were most likely not getting enough sleep to begin with. They were probably sleep deprived. And what you see is when you test their physical performance, that again, the reaction time over the course of getting more sleep starts to improve. They start to become faster. Sprint times start to increase. And not just that, but in-game performance improves. Ability to shoot free throws, ability to shoot three-pointers, and the athletes reported that they felt better during games and felt better during practice. And so athletics is one place where the idea of sleeping more to gain an advantage, to make yourself healthier and perform better, has really taken hold. And what you see is this manifests in all sorts of ways. And you see these stories come out in the media from time to time. They'll come out, for example, during the Super Bowl, when it was reported that the Patriots were using these nap pods or nap rooms to kind of get these kind of boosts of naps to improve their sleep and increase their sleep. Or other things like professional baseball teams, using, essentially buying a private plane to, make it comfortable for their athletes to sleep when they travel. And many, many teams now employ things like nap rooms, where the athletes, after a hard workout, can take some time off, can take a nap, can rest, and can use that rest to recover. Now, some of these are more useful than others, and of course, not all of these are applicable to one's life, right? If you have to travel, when people travel again, to the East Coast, you probably can't afford to hire a plane, and you may not be able to afford first class and lay down your seat. But what you can do is strategically think about what time you travel and what time you engage in your daily activities to allow for more sleep. And that is the other thing that these teams started to do, is that teams started to recognize that just waking up early and being present wasn't productive. right? So that it was more important to actually get a good night's sleep and show up later. So for example, if you're a baseball team and all of your games happen at 7 p.m., why are you showing up to the ballpark at 7 a.m.? You're going to be too tired when the game starts. So what teams start to do is start to decide, we don't want you here at the ballpark right now. So sleep becomes a priority here, right? We don't want you here. We don't want you present, because what we want you doing right now is we want you sleeping. Because we know that if you're sleeping at 7 a.m., at 8 a.m., at 9 a.m., that you will be more prepared to play when it's time for you to play. Many professional athletes have, in media reports and interviews, talked about the importance now of sleep and how sleep is vital to their day-to-day routine. And you see these types of elite athletes reporting 8, 9, 10, 12 hours of sleep on some nights, right, in order to fully recover and fully prepare. This in turn has been brought into other athletic venues, and not just professional athletes, but amateur athletes, Olympians, and athletes in college, really learning about sleep and using sleep to keep themselves healthy and keep themselves performing at their best. So what can we do, right, as non-athletes, or maybe we are recreational athletes, to help ourselves sleep better? So here are some strategies that we can all employ. The first is to set a consistent bedtime and wake-up time and stick to it, right? So if you think about an athlete knows what time they have to perform, right? And they will prepare for that, and they will practice so that they are ready at that time. So when you set a bedtime for yourself, you have set essentially a point where I am prioritizing sleep for this moment, and after this, I will no longer be productive if I continue to work, right? So, and here's where technology can be helpful, because most of our phones and most of our alarms can be set, right, for reminders for this. I have my phone set for a bedtime alarm. A lot of us use alarms to wake up. Not many people use alarms to tell themselves to go to bed. I do, because I know when that alarm hits, whatever I'm working on, it's time to fold it up and it's time to get ready for bed. The same is true for a wake-up time. One of the most important things we can do is wake up at the same time every day, right? Because what happens if we don't do that is our brain loses that kind of mental marker of what time it is we're supposed to wake up, and that makes it harder for us to fall asleep. So it can be very tempting on the weekends to sleep in, to get an extra 2 hours and really recover from that week. But what we find is that if you're sleeping an extra 1 to 2 hours per day on the weekend, what we really want is for you to add up those hours, divide by 5, and spread that through the remainder of the week, right? And set your bedtime and wake-up time so you can achieve those goals. The next thing we want to do is we want to treat our sleep and treat our bed with respect. Right, so what do I mean by that? I mean, if you think about an athlete again, going to a game and getting ready, what do, right? Or think about when you go to the gym. Do you show up in your work clothes and you start lifting weights? No. You go to the gym, you get changed, maybe you stretch, maybe you do a warm-up, right? And all of this prepares you for what you're going to do next, which is have an effective, productive workout. The same is true for your sleep, right? So before you go to bed, you want to allow yourself to wind down. You want to allow yourself to prepare for that night in sleep. And one of the most important things to do for that is to make your bed a place for sleep and sleep only, right? Because a lot of us, we take our work to bed with us, even things we may find relaxing in bed, right? Watching TV, reading a book, all of these actually end up being distractions for us, right? So what we want to do is keep the bed and the bedroom clean, keep it comfortable, and make it so that every time you look at your bed and go into your bedroom, you think, this is the place I'm sleeping, and I'm really looking forward to that, right? So when you bring your laptop and you're working in bed right up until bedtime, and then you close your laptop, you hit the pillow, and you try and fall asleep, you're thinking about work, you're thinking about other things. You haven't prepared properly. So treat your sleep and treat your bed with respect. Allow yourself time to prepare and time to get ready. In addition, remember your 4 pillars of health, right? So sleep is one of the 4 so-called pillars of health. The others, food, exercise, stress management, and mental health. These are all critically important, right? And they all feed into each other. If you're not eating right, if you are physically inactive during the day, if you are stressed or anxious, all of this feeds back and makes your sleep worse. Taking care of yourself during the day will help you sleep better at night. The 4th thing to know is everyone has a bad night, right? And that's okay. So this is an advertisement for an old, I guess, sleep elixir that they used to market amazingly to children that included alcohol, cannabis, chloroform, and morphine, right? So this idea of, I just want to knock myself out because I can't sleep. The incidence of people who have had a bad night's sleep is 100%, right? Everyone at some point has a bad night. One bad night will not hurt you. Every athlete has a bad game. If Steph Curry misses a 3-pointer, he doesn't think about that 3-pointer for the whole rest of the game, because if he does, he will miss every shot after that. If he misses a 3-pointer, he knows the next shot I take, it's going in. And why? Because he's prepared, he's practiced, he's done steps 1 through 3 already, so he's ready, right? And if you don't have a bad night, that's okay. Shake it off. Tomorrow will be a better night. It's important to remember that. And then the last point I want to make is that you might have a sleep disorder. And that's okay too. And the reason that's okay is, 1, sleep disorders are incredibly common. 1 out of every 3 people in this country has difficulty sleeping at some point during the year. 1 out of every 5 people has sleep apnea. 1 out of 100 has restless leg syndrome. 1 out of 2,000 has narcolepsy. About 1 billion people in the world have a sleep disorder. So if you have a sleep disorder, you're not alone. Sleep disorders are incredibly common. They're also easy to diagnose and easy to treat. And that's where we come in. I am a sleep physician. I treat sleep disorders. It's my job. And I love it. It's a great work. And the reason is many, many people get better. So here at Stanford, we have a sleep center, a fully equipped sleep center. It's located at Stanford's outpatient clinic in Redwood City. We have physicians, we have nurse practitioners, we have nurses and doctors ready, willing, and able to help. We have psychologists, all of whom can help you with your sleep disorders. Right? We can help you understand your sleep disorder. We can help you understand what testing may be appropriate and help you understand what treatment may be appropriate. The other thing about saying that some people might have a sleep disorder is that the first 4 points I made, those points are helpful for people who have already healthy sleep but have gotten, lost or sidetracked. If you have a sleep disorder and you are making these conscious changes to your sleep, but you still find you're having problems, that is a sign that you could have a sleep disorder, right? So that is a sign for you to talk to your doctor, talk to your physician about whether it might be appropriate to see a sleep doctor or talk to somebody. But if you do, we'd be happy to help. So that is my talk. I hope you enjoyed it. Thank you very much. I want to thank again the Stanford Blood Center for inviting me here. And I will, I think, field questions right now.
Okay, Dr. Kutscher, thank you very much. We have one question. Why do they sleep deprive residents?
So the answer to why they sleep deprive residents is actually, unfortunately, the answer to why athletes sleep deprive themselves, why people in many fields sleep deprive themselves, and the answer is because that's the way it's always been done, right? So there's again this idea of presence being the most important thing, right? If you are not present, if you are not there, ready, willing, and able to help, you are not motivated, you're not a good worker, you're not a good team player. So this idea has really invaded the medical training world as well. In addition, there's this kind of idea of in a lot of fields of, well, we need to learn how to work while we're tired, right? We're gonna have a bad night, you might be tired, so you need to work while we're tired. But our message in the sleep field, and the message from the data I showed about long-haul truckers is, there is a point when you cannot work when you're tired, when you have to be able to not try and push through, but to recognize your own fatigue, recognize your own limitations. And what we need are systems and industries that welcome somebody coming out and saying, I am tired, I don't feel well, I didn't get a good night's sleep, I don't think I'm gonna be at my best today.
And Wynn asks, what does frequent yawning mean?
So it could be a sign that you're tired. I mean, some people just yawn frequently, and it's not, it's benign. But when people yawn a lot, it might be a sign, again, that you're sleep deprived. And again, the message is not to reach for that cup of coffee or reach for that to caffeine, but to kind of take an evaluation of how much sleep you're getting and think about how much sleep you might actually need.
Really amazing comment here too. Actually, maybe you have some insight into this. In 1993, I went to UCSF for a stroke at age 27. Follow up with a neurologist suspected sleep deprivation since nothing else tested.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's possible. We know, especially chronic sleep deprivation, leads to things like more heart disease, more carotid artery disease. And we know particularly sleep apnea has been associated with higher rates of stroke.
This is one I've always wondered as well. Do daytime naps make up for foregone nights of sleep?
So I am, for the most part, pro-nap, with the caveat that I think naps should really typically be short. So I like to cap naps at about 20 minutes, maybe 30 minutes. Even if you don't sleep for that whole time, just unplugging a little bit, resting, closing your eyes, you can restore some of your alertness. I get concerned when naps start to go 60, 90, 120 minutes, sometimes even longer, right? Because what that is doing is, that is you being so tired from a bad night of sleep that you're trying to make up from that sleep loss. The problem with that is then it becomes harder to fall asleep that night, right? So if you're napping late in the afternoon or late in the evening, or you're taking long naps, you're taking away from the sleep you need during the night.
Thank you, Dennis, for that question too. Ola asks if you would speak a little bit maybe to medications and sleep deprivation.
Medications and sleep deprivation. So medications to help one sleep more.
Sure. Ola, maybe you could clarify a little bit in the comments section for us.
Yeah, I mean, I can talk because sleep aids are also very common. We believe the best sleep is one's own natural sleep, and in fact, we use psychology, like cognitive behavioral therapy, and those types of means for people who have trouble sleeping. Because what we find is that long-term, those treatments are actually more effective than medications. There may be instances when medications can be helpful. I think about medications as one of two ways. Medication as break glass for emergency, right? So I really need to sleep, and these are the only hours I have available, and I have a lot going on. Or medications as a bridge, right? So use medications, again, just like I would use caffeine or naps strategically, and then think about what your next step is going to be.
Karen says, since I'm not getting enough sleep because I'm a night owl, I can relate, how do I train myself to go to bed earlier? The times I've gone to bed early, I wake up in the middle of the night.
Yeah, so one of the keys there, and one of the most important things, are those activities you do during the day, which can help to set your body's internal clock. So probably the most important one for people who are night owls is light. So light in the morning when you wake up, right? And physical activity in the morning when you wake up. And then, eating meals at appropriate times so you're not eating too late, and then removing any excess light at night. And that might include, for example, putting things like blue light filters on your laptop or on your phone, right? So, and turning lights down at night so that you're really, getting your body ready for bed.
Dennis wonders about the use of hypnosis to induce 8 hours of sleep.
So I have had patients who've pursued hypnosis and found it to be successful. So I think hypnosis, among many other therapies, meditation, yoga, mindfulness, can be a helpful measure. It's probably not even, deep breathing exercises. It's probably, it's something that's not right for everybody, but it's something that can be helpful in the right circumstances.
Steve asks, how long before sleep should I stop food or alcohol for the best sleep?
Alcohol particularly, I'll point out, because food tends to vary person to person. You don't want to go to bed hungry, right? But you want to make sure if you need to snack at night, I usually recommend snacks that are higher in protein, not so high in carbohydrates. And you want to make sure you're not eating anything that has caffeine in it, right? So things like chocolate, or sometimes some like flavored drinks and things like that, or sodas that have caffeine can keep you up. But the other part of it, remind me again.
Food and alcohol. Yeah.
Right. So the alcohol is a much bigger issue because alcohol itself is a mild sedative, right? So it can make you sleepy. I think everyone's experienced that if you drink alcohol. The problem is it's very short-lived. And once the alcohol's out of your system, you get this rebound effect where you get a lot of awakening. So the typical pattern if you drink alcohol is to fall asleep early or fall asleep very quickly and then wake up and then be awake for a lot of time during the night. So we generally recommend alcohol around dinner time and then cutting it after that and then not drinking to excess.
Forgive me if I mispronounce, but I believe Heike, is melatonin helpful to get good quality sleep?
So some people find melatonin to be helpful, not everybody. I caution sometimes about the doses of melatonin because what you see over the counter is typically, if you go to a pharmacy, you may find 5 or 10 milligrams. And we generally recommend starting at much lower doses, maybe a half a milligram or 1 milligram, which might be a little bit easier to find. Now, melatonin actually has a couple different purposes. The way most people take it is you take melatonin, it might make you a little bit sleepy. Might help you fall asleep. Again, a short half-life, right? So if your problem is I wake up a lot in the middle of the night, melatonin may not be that helpful. But melatonin can also, at much lower doses, prime your body's system to actually make its own melatonin. So that could be helpful, for example, for somebody who's a night owl, or if you're traveling and you're severely jet lagged, right? So that your body can start making its own melatonin at the right time.
This one's a little bit related to what we were talking about before, but do you recommend full abstention from caffeine and alcohol?
No, I don't, because I'd be a hypocrite. Again, caffeine, I recommend thinking about caffeine strategically. I get concerned when someone says, I have 3, 4, 5 cups of coffee, because what we find is that once you become habituated to caffeine, the effects of the caffeine are no longer as strong, right? So that's where reducing caffeine and then thinking about how you're going to take caffeine. Caffeine's half-life can be anywhere, depending on how you metabolize it, between 4 and 12 hours. Right? So even if you have a cup of coffee at noon, by the time you're going to bed, it may still be in your system. But caffeine, it's the most consumed exogenous substance on Earth. We're not going to stop caffeine, and I'm not trying to stop caffeine. I think there are places and purposes for it. But it's overuse of anything. And the same is true with alcohol. Again, it's essentially overuse. And then I also worry, caution if some people oftentimes will tell me, well, I can drink caffeine at night and it doesn't affect me. I can still fall asleep. Generally, I think that means either you're really sleep deprived, right? Or you're completely habituated to caffeine, meaning you drink a lot of it.
Linda says, that her husband says that my husband says that I hit him and kick him in my sleep as well as I talk a lot. I'm unaware of all of this. What should I do? A common problem. So a lot of people, while they're sleeping, are very active. So the first thing you should do is believe your husband, right? So a lot of times people will
a lot of times what I say is when I see a patient in the office, I'm generally not the first person to tell someone there might be a problem. Generally, a bed partner or a friend has already told them something might be going on. So listen to your husband saying, I think something might be going on here, and that might be something that you might want to talk to your doctor about.
Ola is clarifying on her medication question, not medications so much related to trying to sleep, but medications that cause insomnia.
Oh, yeah. Many medications can. A lot of medications like mood medications, even a lot of over-the-counter medications like allergy medications, can affect sleep. You'll never know how a medicine affects you until you take it, right? Especially for things like medications for mood disorders or neurologic diseases, because brain medicine affects everybody very differently. So you have to see how the medicine affects you. But many medications can be very activating, and if it's causing significant problems, it might not be the right medicine for you. You might want to talk to your doctor about other options. Or a lot of times we'll say, sometimes the problems can just be alleviated by taking medications at a different time, right? So thinking about the timing of when you take medicine.
Peter says 8 hours of sleep is a crude or a rough estimate that's independent of age. How would recommended number of hours vary with age, like for seniors?
Sleep need decreases only slightly, right? And I want to clarify the 8 hours because 8 hours was a recommendation from a long time ago that in the sleep world has really fallen out of favor. And when people ask me, how much sleep should I get? Well, what our Academy's recommendation is to obtain a goal of at least 7 hours of sleep every night. But the right sleep for you is sleep that achieves 3 goals, which is you can fall asleep quickly, you can stay asleep the whole time through the night, and you wake up and you feel refreshed and rested during the day. Not right away. Nobody cartwheels out of bed feeling great, twirling like a Disney princess. It takes people a bit of time to wake up. But after, let's say, 30 minutes or an hour, you should feel alert, right? So those are the 3 goals of sleep. And for some people, that's 7 hours. For some, that's 8. For some, that's 9. For some, it's a little bit less or maybe a little bit more.
Dennis mentions he tried melatonin as a natural sleep aid, and the opposite happened to him. I know you already spoke to melatonin a little bit.
Yeah.
Dennis, if you have additional questions that weren't answered earlier, definitely let us know.
But I can speak to that as well, because melatonin in some people and many sleep aids or medications that are designed to make people drowsy can have a paradoxical effect, right? The opposite effect, and really make people awake or alert. So that is a well-known kind of phenomenon with melatonin as well as several other drugs.
He also asks thoughts on red lights versus blue lights.
So we're talking about melatonin, and blue light is what our body's melatonin process responds to. So blue light is the wavelength of light that suppresses melatonin. So if you get a lot of blue light at night, you might be suppressing your melatonin system. This is a natural phenomenon. So if you look at a sunrise and you look at a sunset and you compare the colors, what you see is when the sun rises, more blue light, right, to wake you up. And when the sun sets, what do you see? The sun is orange, red, pink, right? So less blue light at night. So it's our body's response to nature. What we've done, with our artificial lighting is we've taken out some of that. So you can kind of especially with newer kind of LED bulbs, you might be able to filter out some of the blue light, or you can put blue light filters in place to kind of take away some of the blue light.
What options are there for people for whom cognitive behavioral therapy does not work?
Well, there are other behavioral therapies out there. Cognitive behavioral therapy is not the only one. There are also, as we talked about, some of those supplemental treatments, right? Things like hypnosis or acupuncture or mindfulness. And it's about finding something that you connect with and finding something that's right, for you.
Barbara asks, does marijuana, or I suppose we should say also all cannabis products, help one with sleep?
So again, it's the type of thing that is known to make people drowsy. I think what we find, and cannabis in general is vastly understudied. So we know way less about what our cannabinoid system and what happens, how cannabis affects sleep or our health, than we do almost any other substance that people, well, now I guess regularly consume. But again, it's a process of using medications to do something that should otherwise be happening naturally, right? So what other things might be out there to help you? Things like non-pharmacologic means. We believe, or we strongly suspect, that chronic use of most of these substances, including cannabis, can decrease our body's kind of deeper stages of sleep. So the stages of sleep that are very important for rest and recovery tend to get suppressed with many medications when they're taken long-term, cannabis included. So again, supplements, medicines can be helpful short-term. Think about them as a bridge. Think about what else you want to do.
Joan says, despite 7-8 hours a night, I can fall asleep if I sit down any time of the day. My friends call me a narcoleptic. Is this a concern?
Yeah, so, and this actually gets to someone else asked about, different sleep at different ages. There's no age where being excessively sleepy all the time is normal, right? So whether you're young or you're old, if you are getting what we consider to be an adequate amount of sleep and you remain sleepy, it is a concern. It may be something to talk to your doctor about, maybe see a sleep doctor about.
Dennis asks, how about people like Edison, presumably, per the myth, slept very little? Any comments on that?
Right. So I don't like Thomas Edison because he was, again, one of these people who promoted this idea of very short sleep. Again, it gets back to this, and this is actually around this time is when a lot of our field of medical training came about, where this idea of being awake for 72 hours and training and all this kind of forthright industrialness of needing less and less sleep. And what we know beyond a doubt is that if you are sleeping that little, you are not performing at your best. It is a tiny, tiny subset of people, we're talking about 1 in several millions, who can actually survive and have their health maintained with that little sleep.
A couple of good questions here about staying asleep. Karen says, I can't stay asleep all night no matter how tired I am. I try not to drink too much water before bed, but what can I do to stay asleep?
So again, a lot of awakenings during the night might be something or a reason to talk to your doctor or talk to a sleep doctor to try and identify, whether there's an underlying problem, either physiologic or psychologic, that might be at play that might be treatable.
And similarly, Ola says, should you get up or push through waking during the night?
Yeah, so this gets back to bed as sanctuary. And what we don't want to happen is if you wake up in the middle of the night for that awakening to become prolonged, because then what happens is you start to, people tend to ruminate at that time, right? And that's when the brain starts racing, the mind starts going, and that can make it much harder to get back to sleep. So we generally recommend actually breaking that cycle, getting out of bed, and finding some relaxing activity. This also speaks to the importance of relaxing and unwinding at night, because if you're not doing that, and if you're, for example, over caffeinating or working right up till bedtime, that may not be something that shows as a problem with falling asleep. It may be something that shows as a problem with staying asleep, right? And at that point, if you wake up and you can't get back to sleep, we do actually recommend getting out of bed.
Just a few more here. So are there better times, or are there specific times you should try to go to sleep and wake up, or is it just more important to get those consistent 8 hours?
So it's more important to make sure you're obtaining the adequate amount of sleep that you need to feel rested. And we always want people to sleep at their optimal sleep times. If you're somebody who prefers to go to bed early and wake up early, that's the schedule you should follow. If you're someone who prefers to go to bed late and wake up late, that's the schedule you should follow.
Do you see companies following the trends of professional sports teams and start to implement things like nap rooms to help make their employees more productive?
I think it varies. I think, companies are definitely recognizing the importance of sleep, and you'll see, sleep promotion as part of kind of wellness packages. I think it depends a lot of it. I mean, there are definitely some fields. I mean, we didn't get into it all. Kind of kids and teenagers and schools starting extremely early, when kids tend to sleep in later. So there are fields that have been a little bit slower to respond. Again, medical field also has been fairly slow to respond. And then you also see fields that are trying to implement sleep health and then are using kind of, sleep, I know, as like a motivating factor, right, for wellness programs, like, obtaining more sleep and kind of training for optimizing sleep.
Here's a comment. I try to stick to a consistent sleep pattern during the week, but I sleep in a little later on the weekend. Should I try to keep my sleep times consistent on the weekend, or is it good to get in those few extra catch-up hours?
A little bit of wiggle. We do allow for a little bit of wiggle room. Generally, if you're within a 30 to 60 minute window of your normal awakening, it's acceptable. Ultimately, you are the person who knows what's the right or wrong schedule. If you're sleeping in and it's not affecting your sleep during the week and you still feel like you're getting adequate sleep during the week, then generally that would be acceptable. However, if you feel like you're still tired during the week, or more, that you have more trouble sleeping, for example, Sunday night, you might have more trouble falling asleep, or you get progressively more tired during the week, then that's a sign that maybe you need a little bit more sleep during the week and maybe a little bit less on the weekends.
Karen asks, what are your thoughts on playing music or other meditation type white noise to fall asleep to?
Sure. White noise can be helpful for falling asleep. Audiobooks or calming sounds, all of these, again, can be relaxing and soothing. So if that's something that helps you sleep, it's something you definitely can stick with.
And Emily says, I've heard your brain washes itself over at night, kind of cleaning itself in a way. Is that true?
Yeah, so this is one of the newest fields, is kind of this connection between sleep and dementias, and the idea of these kind of neurotoxins that accumulate during the day, and then when we go to sleep, they kind of wash out, right? So this sleep as kind of a janitorial system. And there's a lot of interesting research in this field. I do think it's actually mostly true, and I think it's a kind of a really exciting kind of place that sleep researchers are looking at. Kind of one of the new powers of sleep is in this idea of cleansing the brain and cleansing the body.
If diagnosed with apnea, is a CPAP or a BiPAP effective?
Yes, so CPAP and BiPAP would be our preferred treatment. They are highly effective. It is my recommendation almost across the board for anyone who has sleep apnea.
You've pretty well covered it. Thank you, everyone, for the lively discussion as well.
Those were good questions.
Yeah,
and no one can see my sweat.
Thank you, Dr. Kutscher. Thank you, everybody. Looks as though we've